Hi, I'm Brother Jake. Now, there are a lot of people out there who think that just because the way the Book of Mormon was translated is slightly different than what they've been led to believe, that means that it somehow isn't a divine record of ancient Americans preserved in a stone box in a hill right behind where Joseph Smith would live hundreds of years later, but that's not true at all. Let me explain. The thing is it really important how exactly the Book of Mormon is translated? I mean, the only thing we really need to know is that it was translated by the gift and power of God, so it doesn't really matter if it happened exactly like this or that. If you want to know if the Book of Mormon is true, you just need to pray and ask God. The rest is just details. So, there you go. Problem solved. Okay, fine. In the spirit of full disclosure, I should probably mention that most of the reason I'm bringing this up right now is because the LDS Church recently released the first ever photos of something called the Seer stone that Joseph Smith used to translate pretty much all of the Book of Mormon. But it really isn't problematic at all, trust me. See, way back in 1822, before Joseph Smith became the most awesome prophet of this dispensation and was just a lowly farm boy, he and his brother were helping a friend named Willard Chase dig a well. And while they were digging, he found this really cool stone that looked like, well, you can see it right there. And he liked it so much that he carried it around with him. And can you blame him? I mean, look at that thing. It's awesome. Well, he didn't just carry it per se. See, it turns out that before he restored the true Church of Jesus Christ on the earth, Joseph Smith did a little bit of money digging, which is this kind of folk magic thing that was popular back where Joseph Smith was growing up, where someone would help people find lost stuff or buried treasure by putting, like, a rock in something like a hat or something, and then receiving a vision about where the lost stuff or buried treasure was or whatever. Anyway, he did this with the rock he found in the well that I just talked about earlier. But it's not a big deal. He was just helping people find buried treasure. What's so bad about that? Well, I mean, he tried to help them. There really isn't much evidence that he ended up actually, finding the treasure people hired him to find, because every time the people he was helping would get close to the actual treasure, it turns out that it would always happen to be protected by an ancient spell or something and start sinking further into the ground so they couldn't get it. But that was just the culture he grew up in, man. I mean, we're all products of our culture, right? Even prophets of God. It's not like Joseph Smith came out of nowhere. Gosh. Anyway, the point is this. As it turns out, according to pretty much every eyewitness account we have, Joseph Smith ended up using that exact same seer stone in the exact same way to translate basically the whole Book of Mormon. And sure, I guess it might seem a little strange that God would let Joseph Smith use a rock from a well to bring forth the most important book of scripture of the past 1,000 years instead of the special translation device called the Urim and Thummim that was, according to Joseph's own account, already included in the same stone box as the golden plates for that exact reason. But it's not like this is the first time a prophet has ever used a physical object to do the stuff they needed to do. Think about it. Moses parted the Red Sea with a staff. Aaron had a rod. The children of Israel were healed from the fiery serpents by a stick with a brass serpent on it. Most of them were sticks now that I think about it. And granted, it seems a little different since the Bible doesn't mention Moses using his staff to perform street magic in the years leading up to the Exodus, but the point is that God uses physical objects from the culture people came from to do prophet stuff. So it's not weird that Joseph Smith used the rock that he found while digging a hole to translate the Book of Mormon. The thing is that we need to keep focused on the important point, which is that regardless of what he used, Joseph Smith was helped by God to read from the gold plates in order to translate the Book of Mormon. Well, read from probably isn't the right phrase because, well, here's how the translation went down. Joseph Smith would put the rock in the hat like we talked about, and then the words the scribe needed to write down would appear on the stone. Oh, which makes more sense why he put the rock in the hat when you think about it. It's like when you read from a smartphone. You need it to be a little dark so you can see, which candies to crush or whatever. So Joseph Smith would need a dark place for the stone, and that's why he put it in the hat. Boom, that is awesome. That is awesome. That is some slam dunk logic right there. Anyway, since he was getting the translation beamed into the stone or whatever, it wasn't like he was reading from the plates themselves that much. And by not that much, I mean he didn't really use the plates in the translation process at all. In fact, by all accounts, the plates usually weren't in the same room or even in the same building as Joseph Smith while he was, translating them. Now, at this point, there might be some people out there thinking, but calling something a translation when someone dictates with their face in a hat while the source document is in another room is totally inaccurate. But remember my video about the Book of Abraham when I was talking about translation and translation? It's kind of like that, sure. In the typical dictionary humdrum definition of the word, translation is when you read from a document written in one language and then write down what it says in another language. But like I said before, this isn't an ordinary translation. It's a translation by the gift and power of God. So it's not weird that Joseph Smith wasn't looking at the text he was supposedly translating at all. I mean, sure, the fact that he didn't need to be near the plates at all to translate them does seem a little weird, since based on the fact that we place so much emphasis on how much the people who wrote them sacrificed to protect them, and how hard it was for Joseph Smith to get them in the first place, and how much Joseph Smith had to sacrifice to keep them safe from people that wanted to steal them, and the fact that the introduction to the Book of Mormon itself contains 2 signed statements from 11 different people who all claim to have seen the actual physical real-life plates as indications of the book's authenticity, it kind of seems like the plates should have been important enough to be in the actual physical vicinity of Joseph Smith while he was translating them, but God's ways are mysterious, so what are you going to do? Anyway, now that I've explained why the way that Joseph Smith translated the Book of Mormon isn't a problem at all, some people might still be wondering why the more accurate version of the translation process isn't taught to church members. But it's not like we're hiding anything. All that information is publicly available. It's not the church's fault if some people get the wrong idea of how it happened. We can't control that. I mean, sure, when I say the information is publicly available, I mean that the whole head in the hat thing is mentioned like in a couple of obscure places, while at the same time, every single depiction of the translation process in the church's substantial audiovisual library shows things happening a little differently. So it might seem a bit disingenuous to say that the LDS Church is blameless in giving people the wrong idea, but those are just artistic interpretations of how it went down. The church can't control how artists imagined it. I mean, sure, the church itself did commission and oversee the production of all those depictions directly, and it continues to include these creative interpretations of how the translation happened in their educational materials at every level. So I guess at some point they could have asked the artist to be a little more historically accurate, but people are already used to seeing it the other way. A sudden change would just freak people out. I mean, look how much people are spazzing out just seeing a picture of the Seer stone. The thing is, I think we're losing sight of the big picture here, which is how awesome the Book of Mormon is. The Book of Mormon is crazy cool, so how much does it really matter how exactly it was translated? I mean, sure, using the same rock in the same way that was used to help people find buried treasure that was never actually found to translate a sacred document might seem a bit odd. And yes, the fact that the gold plates weren't usually in the same room or even in the same building as Joseph Smith while he translated might make you wonder what the point of having the gold plates was in the first place. And granted, the fact that the LDS Church has portrayed and continues to portray the translation process in a way that isn't really true or historically accurate in any of the many educational avenues available to it does seem to contradict my assertion that the whole head in the hat thing really isn't a big deal. But the only thing that really matters is what came out of the translation process, the Book of Mormon, which brings a ton of peace and joy to people's lives. So doesn't that imply that however the Book of Mormon was translated was legit? It's like what Jesus said, by your fruits ye shall know them. Think about it this way. If you had, say, a gem or something, like a diamond, if the diamond is shiny and beautiful and makes you happy, does it really matter where it came from? Have a little faith, dude. Don't make something out of nothing. So you see, it's all good. You just need to focus on the important stuff.